In China, tens of thousands of rivers run on the land, and the coastline extends more than 10,000 kilometers. To break the traffic route restrictions set by rivers and seas, the construction of underwater tunnels is of great importance. The world-renowned Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge has a section of subsea tunnel. As the marine environment is relatively complex, there are more strict requirements for tunnel waterproofing. In such a special environment, how can we build underwater tunnels? In addition to the shield method and undercutting method, the immersed tunneling method, also known as the immersed tube method, can also be used to construct underwater tunnels. It is the main method of constructing underwater tunnels. The immersed tunneling method is also known as the immersed tube method. It is a construction method of sinking box-shaped or tubular cement concrete prefabricated members into the bottom of the river or sea in sections to form a tunnel. It is an important construction method for underwater tunnels. Pearl River Subsea Tunnel of Guangzhou City, Yongjiang Subsea Tunnel of Ningbo City. Well-known tunnels, such as the Tunnel of Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, are built with the immersed tube method. The advantages of immersed tunneling method include the following. 1. It shows high adaptability to geological and hydrological conditions. 2. The tunnel can be shallowly buried to facilitate the connection with roads on both banks. 3. The immersed tube tunnels show good waterproof performance, for the period of construction with this method is short. 5. The construction of immersed tube tunnels costs less. 6. The construction conditions are good. 7. The immersed tube tunnel can be made into a large section multi-lane structure. We can divide the structure of the immersed tube segments into circular and rectangular designs, as the rectangular section shows high space utilization and is easy to prefabricate. The rectangular tube segment can bring more economic benefits than the circular tube segment, and it is often adopted for multi-lane tunnels. Next, let's learn about the main process of construction with the immersed tunneling method. It includes excavation of foundation trench, dredging and paving stone, erection of bearings, immersion of tube segment, underwater connection, foundation treatment, backfilling with earth, equipment installation and interior decoration, completion acceptance. Among them, immersion of tube segment further includes the construction of dry dock, segment fabrication, equipment installation, floating transportation of segment, drainage and renovation. First, we need to know about the construction of dry dock and prefabrication of tube segment. The dry dock can not only be used to prefabricate tube segments in sections, but also be filled with water for floating transportation after the tube segments are made. Therefore, the dry dock shall be located close to the tunnel site, and in areas with good geological conditions, and convenient for floating transportation. According to the project scale, length, and width of tube segments, and the quantity of tube segments, and in combination with the landform and the dry dock site and geological conditions, as well as the construction period, land use fees, and construction equipment of the dry dock, the scale of the dry dock shall be comprehensively considered. According to the prefabrication method, there are dry docks for prefabricating tube segments in one time, and dry docks for prefabricating tube segments in batches. For the dry dock for prefabricating tube segments in one time, the fabrication of all tube segments is completed in one time in the dry dock. Water needs to be filled into the dock only once, and the dry dock does not need to be equipped with a gate, so its construction is simple. Only earth cofferdam or steel sheet pile cofferdam is adopted as the dock head of the dry dock. However, this kind of dry dock is large in scale, covers a large area and requires higher land use fees. On the contrary, the dry dock for prefabricating tube segments in batches is small in scale and covers a smaller area, with lower construction costs and a higher reuse rate. It can also be used to cooperate with other construction procedures to shorten the construction period. However, it has some disadvantages. 1. The gate-type dock gate is required, resulting in high construction costs. 2. It will take several months to connect the former batch of tube segments undocked for sinking with the latter batch of tube segments, and thus it is not conducive to the stability of the tube segment that is sunk first, and it is hard to ensure safety. 3. The excavated foundation trench may be subject to siltation, which will affect the quality of the foundation of the later batch of tube segments. 4. Repeated water filling and drainage of the dry dock will affect the stability of the dock wall. 5. Prefabricating tube segments in batches will add more workload to the demolition and reassembly of dock bottom construction equipment, resulting in an increase in costs of temporary works. 6. During floating transportation of the latter batch of tube segments, the temporary channel may need to be dredged again. Having studied the construction of dry dock, let's move to the prefabrication of tube segments. According to the materials, shapes, lengths and quantities required for a project, and specific instructions on the project, the concrete of the tube segment shall be poured in the dry dock in advance, and the consistency and watertightness of the concrete shall be ensured during pouring. 1. If the unit weight of the concrete of the tube segment changes obviously to more than 1%, the tube segment often fails to float. 2. If the concrete density of the side walls and slabs of each part of the tube segment is inhomogeneous, the tube segment will tilt sideways. To ensure the watertightness of the tube segment, it is necessary to adopt good waterproofing measures for the tube segment to avoid any water seepage. There are 3 waterproofing measures for tube segments: waterproofing of structures, waterproofing of the outer side of structures, and waterproofing of construction joints. Waterproofing of the structure can be made by doing the following. 1. Adopt waterproof concrete for the pouring of the tube segment. 2. Avoid cracks on the concrete of the tube segment caused by temperature differences and drying shrinkage. Waterproofing of the outer side of structures can be made by adopting the following: steel shell, steel plate, coiled materials, waterproof protective layer and waterproof coating. Waterproofing of construction joints can be made by setting 1 to 2 water stops. After the tube segment is fabricated, a leakage test must be carried out. Generally, the ballast tank shall be filled with water before the dry dock is filled. Then the dry dock chamber shall be filled with water. When 24 to 48 hours passed after the filling, operators shall enter the tube segment to conduct a careful underwater leakage test on all outer walls of the tube segment, including the top plate and bottom plate. If there is no leakage, the ballast water can be discharged so that the tube segment can float out of the water. If there is any leakage, it can be repaired after the dock chamber is drained. In addition to the dry dock work on land, let's learn about the foundation trench excavation and the channel dredging, which are carried out simultaneously with the dry dock work. Within the scope of immersed tube segment in water at the tunnel site, the foundation trench shall be excavated underwater. The longitudinal slope at the trench bottom is required to be the same as the designed longitudinal slope of the tube segment. The section size of the foundation trench shall be determined according to the section size of the tube segment and geological conditions. The bottom width of the excavated foundation trench is generally 4 m wider than that of the tube segment. The dredging work of excavation of the argillaceous foundation trench is carried out in 2 stages, i.e. rough excavation and fine excavation. After that, we can carry out the floating transportation and immersion of tube segment. After the pipe section is prefabricated in the dry dock, water can be filled in the dry dock to make the prefabricated tube segment float gradually. In the floating process, the anchors arranged around the dry dock for floating transportation of the tube segment can be used. The floating tube segment shall be fixed using the ground anchor rope, and then the tube segment shall be pulled out of the dock in sections by a winch arranged on the top of the dry dock. The tube segment transported to the construction site must be sunk to the required position. The methods for tube segment immersion can be divided into 2 categories. One is the lifting and sinking method, and the other is the pulling and sinking method. The lifting and sinking method can be further divided into the floating crane method, floating box method, SAP method and square barge method. After the immersion of tube segments, we need to connect them underwater. There are 2 connection methods. One is the underwater concreting method. The other is hydraulic crimping method. The joints of tube segments can have various structures according to different construction sequences and connection methods. The joints are divided into initial joints and final joints. The key to underwater connection technology is to ensure that the tube segment joint is watertight. Finally, foundation treatment needs to be carried out. The purpose of foundation treatment is as follows. It is not to deal with the settlement of the foundation soil, but for other purposes. Before the tube segment is sunk, the foundation trench is excavated unevenly. As a result, there are many irregular voids between the bottom surface of the trench and the bottom surface of the immersed tube, which will cause uneven stress on the foundation, leading to its uneven settlement and cracking of the immersed tube structure due to relatively greater local stress. Therefore, foundation treatment must be carried out during, so that voids between the bottom surface of the tube segment and the foundation can be filled densely, and the 2 are in uniform contact with each other. The treatment methods of immersed tube foundation include the scraping paving method, also known as the pre-paving method, sand spraying method and pressure grouting method, also known as the post-filling method, pile foundation method, sand grouting method, and grouting pocket method. As the most common construction method for underwater tunnel construction, the immersed tunneling method will be more and more widely used in the future. Understanding the method and its principles will help us to complete the construction of the whole underwater tunnel better, faster and safer in the actual construction process. After class, please think about how to ensure the water tightness of tube segments during their underwater connection.